Hello and welcome to a very special video, everybody. Now, I know a lot of people are probably new or interested in finding out really basic things like when is it a good idea to do brush priming? Or, hey, maybe you are new to the hobby and this is something that you're not super familiar with. Excuse the mess, but we have two units here that I have primed. One of these right here is for someone I've been painting up their sisters, and this is a guy who's going to be added to my Iron Warriors at some point. But in both cases, I have recently just primed them. That this one's not good done. That's why you see the orange. And I wanted to make a few points. Now, there's several reasons you might want to do brush priming. Maybe you're like me and you've just had multiple days of cold, beating rain, and you don't think it'd probably be a great idea for the priming process to be have your models and yourself drenched with super cold, icy rain. But hey, maybe that doesn't dissuade you. Well, the cold rain, anyways. But that's not a condition that's conducive towards it. But you don't have an airbrush, that's when you would probably go straight to brush priming. Other reasons can be just because you live in an area that's not conducive to it. Maybe it's super windy, maybe the air quality is not great and you don't want things getting stuck to your model. And maybe you live in a tiny apartment and can't safely use an airbrush because you don't have the proper ventilation and a mask. Please have proper ventilation. There's a lot of reasons why. And there's a lot of other really basic things, like maybe you just don't have the money for an airbrush. There are multiple solutions to it. Now, many primers will work from a brush application, and they will perform differently depending on how and why and what you do with them. But one I can immediately suggest is the Stynylrez line, if you can get it safely and affordably. It has some very good qualities. It can self-level pretty well. I've had nothing but success using it. Even when it's wet and it will look like a complete disaster, it tends to tighten up on the model and preserve all the detail. Now, the only one I've had a little bit of trouble with, and we're going to try to move them right there, is the white. Now, the white can be a little bit, as you can see, some of the gray plastic. Let's just slide this one over here and this one there. You can see peeking through the primer. Now, that is still a primed area, but it can be a bit frustrating if you want a straight coat from a brush. Now, I'm using this as a bit of an advantage because I'm using a fairly translucent green, Skarsnik green, that I watered down a pretty good chunk, so it looks like the paint is wearing away and has dirt and all kinds of different grime. And we'll put a real quick example of that right here. Now, he's only painted with very few paints, but also the Agrax Earthshade did a great deal to help make him look even dirtier than he is. Now, there are other factors to take in consideration, like the shading you do. This guy's a different shade style than him. You can definitely tell that right off there. But you'll also have different effects, as I immediately drop the model, fantastic, that you can get depending on the undercoat of your primer. Now, this is standard gray, which is a fantastic one. We have their black, which you can still see some of the metal popping out. If you have gaps or areas where it doesn't get, take a basic paint that matches it and just hit those up with a brush and you should be fine, especially on metal models. Like I said with the Def Guard, I wanted this because it's going to work really well with the more translucent paint I'm using. But you can also hit this up with a straight normal white paint and be able to go from there. This model, the sister, is using a 2-to-1 Stynylrez gray and white primer. So 2 bits of white to 1 of gray, you get this. It's pretty close to Gray Seer, and that's because of the paint style or job that is going for example, as you can see on this sister here, it helps with the reds and things like that. Let's go ahead and just move her over there. So those are some other things. The other thing is with brush, you can change what primer goes on the different areas. Let's say you want black primer on the armor. Well, you just use the brush on the black primer on the armor. Whereas in the skin, you might want white primer or like a mix like I used, or so on and so on and so on. Those are a number of reasons. Now, the other thing to consider is if you're going to do this, you can do it from a small well, something like one of these ketchup containers I'm putting water in right now. That's always good, and you just take a cheap generic brush like this, and you just don't do this, stab at it. The paint will do the rest of the work. And the other thing is you can use a wet palette like the one I have a video for and go from there. Now the thing you'll note when you have a wet palette is it will add water to it. So it will look like it has flooded an area completely up until it dries and the water evaporates. So that can give you a bit of a heart attack when you're like, oh my god, I just ruined this model. It won't, but it can be a bit surprising. Just don't go too heavy on it. But it will tighten up and look pretty good. So those are some reasons. Don't be too afraid of just taking your time on it, doing a model at a time, going from there. One thing I do when I'm doing a big project and I'm worried about priming is I'll come home after work or whatever, and I have a little bit of time. Fantastic. I'll prime a model. I'll put him somewhere where there's not going to be a bunch of dust or cat hair or, fairy dust or whatever happens to be a problem in your local area, and let him dry. And then the next day I'll come in and prime that next model, and I'll do that throughout the week until I have the ones that I plan on painting. And then I'll do a single base coat, especially if they're from one unit. I would definitely say just every night come home, hit it with that one base coat, just like how you did with priming. You take one off the shelf, you hit the armor, in this case, with like whatever color you're going to use. You put him on the shelf to dry. The next night, you pick up the next guy, do the same, and just work through it. It'll take a little bit more time than if you just try to go for full getting models done at a time, but it can be a little bit more relaxing and you'll still get progress done. So that is a really basic primer on, priming with a brush. Don't rush. Use brushes you can easily replace. Like these are like cheapy Tamiya, there we go. Ones I got from a local hobby store for like $5 for 50 of them or something like that. Use a primer that you like. There's Stynylrez, there's the Mecha, there's a whole bunch of them. Experiment with a model that maybe you don't care too much about, like maybe you got one off eBay or you picked up one of those cheap D&D ones. See how the primer works on that and then commit on it. But Stynylrez are one I can definitely suggest, but there are a number of other ones out there you can use, and just go with what you're comfortable with and get you what you want. Now, later I'll talk about when to use certain colors of primers and undercoats and other ways to take care of those things. But for right now, you have a fantastic day, and I hope this helped. Bye-bye.